Spoilers for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 8 JoJolion, as well as JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 7 Steel Ball Run. If either of those things are something you're interested in, come back when you've read them. It's a tale as old as time itself. As old as Christianity, as old as the story of man. Humanity exists in a state of innocence, in a blissful kind of ignorant paradise, until something enters its ecosystem. A being that cannot truly participate in humanity, only observe it, envy it, and manipulate it. A presence that understands people, desires suffering, but cannot experience them in the same way. And that being introduces a fruit. Something that does not belong to the same order of things, a fruit that introduces a way of life, an element foreign to their world. From that point forward, the world begins to reorganize itself around that idea. Of course, I am talking about 2011's JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 8, JoJolion. JoJolion attempts to be a lot of things, and that is reflected in both its length and story structure. Whether it be Paradise Lost, a real-world cultural analysis of Japan following the 2011 Tohoku earthquake, or even a reboot retelling of Part 4, what we end up with is one of, if not the most thematically dense manga runs in recent history. One of those themes is its approach to good and evil, the religious parallels in its storytelling, and how all of that ties back into the spiritual logic established in Steel Ball Run. What we saw play out in Part 7 was ultimately a redemption story, positive change through biblical ideas of sacrifice, conviction, and loss. Part 8 is the evil to Part 7's good, a story about corruption, calamity, and as it says in Chapter 1, breaking a curse. So it begs, what changes from Part 7 to 8 to invert the narrative function of this universe's rules? Steel Ball Run established a world where miracles or gifts were tied to sacrifice, explored through the character of Johnny Joestar. In consequence, the entire story of JoJolion stems from the concept of equivalent exchange, loss and benefit. In Part 7, equivalent exchange exists spiritually as the costs Johnny pays for his ability to walk. Johnny only gains the ability to walk through immense personal loss, through the death of Gyro, through the abandonment of the selfish worldview he began the story with, and ultimately through his acceptance that miracles are not the loopholes he had begun his journey seeking. And by the end of his story, that journey reaches its natural conclusion. Johnny gives his life for somebody else. Specifically, he dies attempting to transfer the aforementioned curse, the rock disease, away from his son, taking that suffering onto himself through the spin. And where he is buried, something spectacular emerges. The wall eyes are a geological phenomenon appearing the night after an earthquake and tsunami on March 11, 2011, several dozen meters inland, taking the appearance of a bluff or steep cliff with concave eyes sitting at the top. They have two powers, the ability to grant stands, and when any two objects are buried, they merge together, although the latter has reportedly existed for a long time. And from that starting point, the logic of JoJolion cements itself as equally religious and transactional. Every gain should, in theory, demand a loss, an equivalent to exchange. When Johnny died to cure his son, he did not get rid of the curse, he only passed it elsewhere, to his wife's side of the family, the Higashikatas. And this is the narrative center from the middle to the end of JoJolion. How to cure the rock disease. See, JoJolion is separated into two central plot threads, who is Josuke, and then the rock disease and the Locacaca. And sitting at the center of both of these plot lines is Toru. Toru is a significantly more interesting villain to discuss than all of JoJo's previous antagonists, for the somewhat paradoxical fact that he is less of a character. If I asked you to explain Valentine or Kira as characters to me, you could do so quite easily. Valentine is a parody of American imperialism, draping himself in religious iconography to justify his conquest. Kira is a fetishistic killer, a rendition of the peace-disrupting, suburbanite, terrorizing serial killer that dominated pop culture. But Toru is a rock. Rock Human is the name given to the primary antagonists of JoJolion. They are a group of humanoid, silicon-based life forms as opposed to the average-based carbon life of Earth. Visually, they are identical to humans, live for centuries, and do not grow gradually, but molt their entire bodies at once every couple of years. And as humans slowly took over the environment, certain rock humans decided to, as the narrative explains, become parasites by falsely entering the family registry system to maintain property and assets. They are, crucially, not humans. They are animals that evolved separately and may look like us, but beyond their stark intelligence on par with that of humans that develop spontaneously in early childhood, they are almost entirely sociopathic. They have no desire to form or maintain social units, even familial ones. Rock human mothers abandon their children at birth, being taken away by wasps due to their size. Toru is one of these rock humans, which would make this analysis very simple if that was all there was to him. It would be remarkably easy to say that JoJolion is a story about evil invading a community from the outside, that the rock humans are simply monsters, and that Toru's role is to corrupt Morioh through the introduction of the Locacaca. The problem is that JoJolion repeatedly refuses to make that argument. Because of the characters most devoted to the philosophy of the rock humans, some aren't rock humans, and some of the people who display the fiercest emotions are. Aisho's entire motivation stems from a failed relationship. Dolomite spends years obsessing over a woman he believes abandoned him. Even Toru himself spends his final moments speaking less about power or victory, and more about memories, dreams, the things people leave behind after death. The distinction JoJolion draws is therefore more complicated than simply human versus rock human, good versus evil, man versus nature. The rock humans are not evil because they lack emotion. In many cases, they clearly possess emotions. What separates them is the way they relate to other people. Rock humans are generally antisocial. Araki makes sure we understand this on a world-building level. We are told that 97.5% of rock human-human relationships end in murder, that they entered society through the Locacaca organization to leech off of it solely to maintain possessions. Although we are shown a few rock humans who seem to be genuinely capable of love and connection, because the role the rock humans occupy within JoJolion is not to represent evil. Throughout the story, they are repeatedly associated with nature. They are described as a parallel evolution to humanity, a contingency plan in case carbon-based life failed. They gravitate towards Devil's Palms, places where stands emerge naturally from the earth itself. And unlike humans, they rarely concern themselves with concepts like family, community, or obligation. The rock humans represent a particular philosophy of survival. The world of the rock humans is fundamentally transactional. They literally cannot view relationships through any other lens. The journey Johnny Joestar goes on is a humbling one, where he gives his all to his craft and growth, and loses the people close to him for it. The rock humans arrive at the opposite conclusion, a climb to the top, whether it be society or power, where the goal is not to bear the burden yourself, but to find somebody else willing or unwilling to carry it for you. which begins to explain why Araki places them at the center of the Locacaca trade, a fruit, specifically the new Locacaca, that allows the price of an equivalent exchange to be paid by another. A philosophy of domination, a ruthless ascent, Darwinian, not necessarily might makes right, because as a group they do not concern themselves with notions of right or wrong. They concern themselves with survival. The rock humans are animals. Highly intelligent animals, certainly, but animals nonetheless. They do not inherit humanity's moral framework because they evolved outside of it. The concepts of duty, self-sacrifice, obligation, or even familial love are not foundational to their existence. They understand these things intellectually, the same way a predator understands behavior, but they do not organize their lives around them. Instead, they organize themselves around opportunity. The strong, adaptable, and useful survive, and anything that increases the odds of survival is naturally selected, regardless of the cost imposed on others, which is why they attempt to dominate human society, the new world, through things we place value in, like wealth or status. What makes Toru such a fascinating antagonist is that he rarely acts directly, unlike Valentine, who attempts to seize power through force, or Kira, who spends the second half of his story targeting the main cast to preserve his lifestyle. Toru functions like a force of nature. He doesn't dominate the narrative like Kira, he isn't tormenting Morioh. He simply creates conditions and solutions under which people succumb to his worldview. How much of someone else are you willing to sacrifice in order to get what you want? Josuke Higashikata, a human, is obsessed with his family's status and power, concerned with his father's passivity in the rock disease currently possessing his son. He adopts the rock human philosophy. What we've established isn't good versus evil, or even human versus rock human, because Josuke is another human antagonist. The conflict is the character's two competing understandings of sacrifice. Part 7 invokes the religious iconography of loss. Now we are dealing in the realm of man. Remember, the setup to this story is analogous to Paradise Lost. How does man interpret the laws of this world now that they have the tools to skirt them? And the answer the story upholds is Josuke. Johnny is my favorite protagonist because he's the most human. Josuke is my second favorite because he's the least. Josuke is born from the equivalent exchange of one Yoshikage Kira and one Josefumi Kujo, after being fed the new Locacaca to save Kira's life and sacrifice Josefumi's. What results is a man with the combined knowledge of these two men, with no past, no family history, no childhood, no name, and no place in society. Imagine that. A person with the body of a young adult, an advanced understanding of the world, no memories, no family, no name, and no place in society. If the rock humans represent a worldview detached from human connection, then Josuke should, by all accounts, be the perfect rock human. He emerges from the earth fully formed, disconnected from any social structure, possessing none of the relationships or obligations that define ordinary people. In many ways, his circumstances are closer to Toru's than they are to most of the cast. And yet the story repeatedly pushes him in the opposite direction. The central mystery of the first half of JoJolion is presented as an identity crisis. Who is Josuke Higashikata? Is he Kira? Is he Josefumi? What does being these two people mean? For most of the story, Josuke believes the answer to that question will tell him who he is supposed to become, who he is supposed to seek out and love. Instead, the opposite happens. The deeper Josuke digs into his past, the less important it becomes. The story gradually strips away the idea that identity is something to be inherited. By the latter half of JoJolion, he is no longer pursuing Kira's or Josefumi's goals, he is pursuing his own. The person he used to be stops mattering, and the person he chooses to become takes its place. This is why Holly, Kira, and by extension one of Josuke's moms, is so important. When Josuke states that the only proof of his existence is curing Holly, he is not only talking about evidence. He's not saying Holly is just proof of one of his past lives, that he was once Kira. He is saying that the only thing giving meaning to his existence in the face of his lack of self is his choice, is an act of love directed towards another in a story obsessed with inheritance, transaction, memory, and identity. Josuke defines himself through his responsibilities. And this is where Josuke diverges from Toru. Although only introduced formally in the last 30-odd chapters of the story, we come to understand Toru has spent his life concerned with what remains. As he dies, his thoughts explode towards the traces people leave behind after death. His attempt at building status and power was in a ultimately somewhat pathetic attempt of a man born with no self to preserve himself. Josuke begins the story with none of those things. No legacy, no history, no achievements, no self. And because of that, he becomes uniquely capable of building an identity through his actions rather than preserving one through his ambition. And if Toru and Josuke represent two different answers to the same problem, their stands do as well. This is why I think Toru works so well as a satanic figure, specifically Milton's Satan. Not because he is evil. JoJo is filled with evil characters. Dio murders people for sport. Cars seeks the extermination of humanity. Toru is different. What makes him interesting is the idea that he exists in a state of perpetual justification. Throughout Paradise Lost, Milton's Satan is presented with opportunities to repent, opportunities to change, to abandon the path that has led him into misery and isolation. He refuses every single one. At several points, he acknowledges what he's doing is evil, not because he's incapable of making another choice, but because doing so would require surrendering the version of himself he's constructed. Toru occupies a remarkably similar position. For all the discussion of rock humans as creatures fundamentally separate from humanity, the story repeatedly demonstrates that they are capable of many of the same emotions. Toru speaks fondly of Yasuo. He reminisces about memories they shared together. When he dies, he wistfully reaches out towards a wasp. He describes himself as a lost soul. As he dies, he becomes increasingly concerned not with victory, but with what will remain of him after he's gone. His fixation on dreams carries with it a strangely human desire to leave a mark on the world. Every meaningful relationship in his life becomes secondary to the position he hopes to obtain, what he thinks is the self, through the new Locacaca. Every attachment is ultimately subordinated to ambition. It's why many people don't even know if they can believe the things he says. Does he actually love Yasuo? Or is he just saying what he thinks will keep advancing him towards his goal? I think you can. I think what we see isn't exclusively manipulation. I think we're seeing someone in a constant identity crisis, stemming from the fact these are creatures born without identity. We are born with a basis for who we are. We have a family name, material conditions, friends and family, and those things shape us into our eventual individuality. Toru has none of those. What he sees projected from everyone else is what he believes being a one is. When Josuke emerges from the ground, he is met with a someone, and chooses to live not as a reflection of what that someone wants to show, but in service of helping that someone, and throughout, develops this into an identity. By the end of the story, the question of who he is has become almost irrelevant. The answer doesn't change who he chooses to be. Whether he's Kira Josefumi or something entirely new, his actions remain the same. He chooses to help Yasuo, he chooses to save Holly, he chooses to protect the people around him. For Josuke, existence, his self, isn't validated by memory, status, or legacy. It's validated through love. The only thing proving he is alive is his willingness to act on behalf of another person. And fittingly, their stands embody those philosophies perfectly. Stands are manifestations of one's will or fighting spirit. On a mechanical level, Toru's stand, Wonder of You, manipulates calamity. Anyone who pursues Toru or attempts to interfere with his plans is subjected to an escalating chain of misfortune. A raindrop becomes lethal, a panel is pulled off a plane to fall on you. The world itself seems to conspire against those who seek him out. Throughout this entire story, the function of Toru has been less as a character and more as a corrupting influence. He enters systems, takes existing desires, he finds people already suffering and presents them with a way to move that suffering somewhere else. Kira wants to save his mother, sports giants want to heal injury, Jobin wishes to save his son. Toru didn't create those desires, he builds an empire around exploiting them. Wonder of You operates according to that exact same principle. It takes the real, tangible flow of calamity, the natural, unavoidable, coincidental disasters, anything from hurting yourself cooking to earthquakes and hurricanes, and places Toru's would-be pursuers in the middle. It is a stand built around displacement, around the idea that pain should always be avoided, always belong to somebody else. And yes, now we have to discuss Go Beyond. Josuke's stand, Soft and Wet, creates bubbles that can take things, properties. In combat, this takes the form of, for example, stripping someone's sight or removing the friction from someone. At the end of the story, Josuke learns his stand is not bubbles, but rather individual lines that operate using the spin technique to appear as spherical. After learning about how his stand really works, Josuke evolves a new ability called Soft and Wet Go Beyond. A bubble that is so thin it does not exist to the same universe, and as such cannot be targeted by the calamity-inducing Wonder of You. This is how Josuke kills Toru. Many people absolutely hate Go Beyond because, understandably, it sounds a little bullshit. I'm here to offer, I believe Go Beyond, or at the very least, the idea of an attack that exists outside reality, was set up or intentional. Throughout the entirety of JoJolion, every major conflict is built around equivalent exchange and identity. Someone always pays the price. Someone always bears the burden. The curse is transferred from generation to generation. The Locacaca heals a part of your body by harming another. The new Locacaca allows that process to occur on an even grander scale between people. Even Wonder of You is built around this logic. Pursue Toru, and reality itself will ensure a debt is collected. What makes Wonder of You so terrifying isn't just that it causes bad things to happen, it's that it weaponizes a sort of inevitability. Every action has consequences. Every pursuit incurs a cost. Every attempt to reach Toru is met by a universe that insists you must suffer for it. This is also why Jobin ultimately fails. Jobin isn't a rock human. He loves his family. He loves his son Tsurugi. He genuinely wants to uplift the people closest to him. Yet that love becomes the very thing Toru's worldview exploits. The moment Jobin accepts the idea that someone else should bear the cost for the people he values, he's already accepted the logic of the rock humans. He's accepted the idea that suffering is something to be moved around, rather than endured. And the universe has already set up a part before that is not the case. a power derived from the spin, the same force that defined Johnny Joestar's journey, attached to a character who has spent the entire story rejecting transactional understandings of identity. The reason Josuke defeats Wonderview isn't because it's stronger shonen bullshit. The bubble exists outside the world's moral framework. It cannot be accounted for by Calamity because Calamity, like equivalent exchange, requires a relationship between cause and effect. Wonderview governs effect. Calamity is manipulated only in the specific scenario of pursuing Toru. And Go Beyond is something that exists beyond consequence. And thematically, that is exactly what Josuke is. Toru spends the entire story trying to become somebody. He seeks status, legacy, recognition, and a place within the order of society. Everything he values ultimately points back towards himself. Josuke begins the story with nothing. No self in the way Toru understands the word. What makes Josuke so difficult for Toru's worldview to comprehend is that when the time comes to be his own person, he never builds himself around the things Toru thinks make up a legacy or self. He doesn't define himself through ownership, status, or legacy. He doesn't spend the story searching for a position within society. By the time he discovers who he used to be, the answer barely matters. For Josuke, existence itself is love, through acting for Yasuo, Holly, the Higashikatas, for the people he chooses to care about. He behaves according to a worldview completely incompatible with Toru's. And this is why Go Beyond exists outside Calamity, because Josuke lives a life incompatible with the influence of the Locacaca. Even when he does pursue the fruit, the burden falls on him. The climax only happens at the Higashikata house because of the actions of Jobin. Go Beyond doesn't exist because when mirrored to Toru, Josuke shouldn't. Not simply because it exists outside the universe's normal framework, but because Josuke himself does. Throughout JoJolion, every major character is trapped by something. The Higashikatas are trapped by the curse. Jobin is trapped by his ambition. Toru is trapped by his need to become somebody. Josuke is the exception. He shouldn't exist. He is the product of a genuine miracle, a fusion of two people. A man with no history, no inheritance, and no rightful place in the world. By every conventional understanding of identity, he is incomplete. And yet he becomes the most complete person in the story. The irony is that Toru spends the entire story desperately trying to become a person, while Josuke spends the entire story discovering he never needed to. The answer to who is Josuke Higashikata is ultimately irrelevant. He's just a guy. If you enjoyed this essay, feel free to like and subscribe, but more importantly than that, let me know what you think in the comments, because all three of us JoJolion fans, we need to stick together. I need someone to talk to about this. So thank you, and have a good one.